The sharp, burnt smell of my house still clung to my hair when she strutted into my courtroom, acting as though she owned the place. There I was, Judge Miriam Blackwood, dressed in my black robes, gavel in hand, glaring at the woman who had just committed arson against a sitting judge. The audacity of it all made my teeth grind. But Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea what she had just walked into. You see, when you set fire to a judge's home, you'd better hope she doesn't have the chance to return the favor legally. And trust me, I was about to serve her a hefty dose of justice, topped off with some serious federal prison time. This HOA Karen thought burning down my house would silence me. Instead, it sparked a fire within me that would burn down her entire criminal empire. Every illegal fine, fraudulent claim, and intimidation tactic. I had it all meticulously documented. What would you do if your nemesis handed themselves to you on a silver legal platter? Where are you watching from? Because this revenge is going to get ugly. 6 months before my house became a crime scene, I was Judge Miriam Blackwood, respected, feared by criminals, but utterly broken. I had just buried Harold after watching cancer ravage him, piece by piece. After 28 years of marriage, he was gone. Our 1940s craftsman home in Pinewood Estates now felt like a tomb. Pinewood had once been a neighborhood for working-class families and retired teachers tending their gardens. Then the money moved in. Modest ranch homes were torn down to make way for massive McMansions with 3-car garages and wine cellars. The longtime residents, like Walt Henderson, who'd been here since 1965, watched their property taxes skyrocket while the new rivals grumbled about neighborhood standards. Enter Bryn Ashworth Sterling, the queen of this gentrification movement. Think of every entitled suburban nightmare you've ever met, then add designer athleisure and a god complex. At 45, she drove a silver Tesla worth more than most people's annual salaries, always sipping some $20 superfood smoothie while lecturing everyone on how they were doing life all wrong. She moved in with her contractor husband 2 years ago, immediately announcing her plans to elevate Pinewood. Translation: get rid of the undesirables. My first run-in with Bryn happened while I was putting up Harold's memorial fence. We'd planned this 6-foot privacy barrier together during his last months, our little sanctuary to drink coffee and watch the sun rise in peace. The fragrance of his prize roses filled the morning air as I worked, 15 years of his loving care still blooming despite his absence. The sound of expensive boots crunching on autumn leaves signaled her arrival. "You must be the widow," she said, without a single word of sympathy or introduction, just a cold, clinical assessment. "Judge Blackwood," I corrected, wiping soil from my hands with deliberate composure. "Right, the judge," she replied, as though my title were some kind of affliction. "I'm Bryn, HOA president." "We have a problem." Out came the pink tape measure, her weapon of choice. The metallic snap of it unfurling pierced the quiet morning like a whip. She measured my fence with exaggerated precision, pursing her lips in feigned disapproval. "6'2", she clicked her tongue. "Our regulations clearly state 6 feet maximum. That's a $500 violation, plus immediate removal costs." I stood up slowly, my back cracking from grief and sleepless nights. "Show me that regulation." Her manicured fingers wrestled through a leather portfolio, clicking the papers like miniature gavels. After 5 minutes of searching, she found nothing because the regulation didn't exist. My fence measured exactly 6 feet. I'd hired a licensed surveyor specifically to avoid this kind of nonsense. "Well," she huffed, her face reddening beneath her spray tan, "we'll see about that, Judge." The venom in her voice made it clear this wasn't about property standards. It was personal. That evening, while eating microwaved leftovers and sipping Harold's favorite bourbon, I pulled up court records. Bingo! 3 years ago, Sterling Premium Builders had appeared before my bench, trying to scam an 80-year-old veteran out of $30,000 for emergency roof repairs. The roof was perfectly fine. I ruled against them harshly, even referring them for contractor fraud investigations. This fence. It was nothing but revenge, pure and simple. But Bryn had made a critical mistake. She had chosen to target a woman who had spent 2 decades sentencing murderers, rapists, and con artists without hesitation. Someone who had watched her soulmate die with dignity while simultaneously planning how to honor his legacy. A person with absolutely nothing left to lose and a complete understanding of how the legal system could be weaponized by someone well versed in its every flaw. The rough texture of Harold's fence posts beneath my hand reminded me of why I had built it. Not to keep the world out, but to protect something precious. Our memories, our love, our final project together. Bryn Ashworth Sterling had just declared war on a federal judge's sanctuary. In my courtroom, we had a technical term for that level of recklessness, exhibit in a federal case. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. Within 2 weeks, Bryn launched what I could only describe as psychological warfare masquerading as HOA enforcement. Clearly, she had studied every petty tyrant's handbook and decided to turn my life into her personal stress test. The certified letters began arriving like clockwork thick, manila envelopes that made my mailman cringe with apologies. 7 pieces of registered mail in 10 days, each more ludicrous than the last. Violation notice number 1, an unapproved decorative garden feature. The offense: Harold's memorial stone, a simple granite marker reading, "In memory of love that grows eternal." Apparently, grief monuments were a violation of Pinewood's uniform landscape aesthetic. Violation notice number 2, a non-regulation mailbox color. My mailbox, which had been standard issue since the Reagan era, was suddenly creating visual discord. But the one that really set my teeth on edge. Violation notice number 3, excessive bird feeding creating nuisance conditions. My modest feeder, which attracted Cardinals Harold's favorite birds, had become my morning ritual. The sight of them as I sipped my coffee and breathed in the mountain air was a way of pretending he might still come up behind me. Each letter demanded fines ranging from $2 to $500, threatening liens and legal action. The expensive paper stock they used probably cost more than most of the fines themselves. Here's where 20 years on the bench came in handy. During law school, I'd memorized Colorado's HOA statutes after my landlord tried similar intimidation tactics. These letters had more legal holes than a mob lawyer's alibi. Real HOA fines had to be reasonable, linked to actual violations, and properly documented in adopted bylaws. Bryn's notices referenced non-existent regulations and failed to include mandatory hearing procedures. It was time for judicial payback. I spent 3 evenings in Harold's basement office, surrounded by his law books and the musty scent of old legal volumes, preparing my counterattack. I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission, detailing Bryn's procedural violations. I photographed my property from every angle and created spreadsheets documenting her illegal fine patterns. My evidence preservation training was about to become a weapon. But Bryn wasn't done with her amateur antics. On Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing drunk drivers, my new security cameras captured pure criminal stupidity in action. Bryn showed up with an entourage. Her interior designer, the gaunt woman in head-to-toe white, and her personal trainer, moonlighting as a property inspector, were with her. They spent 2 hours fabricating evidence for non-existent violations. The designer pointed with exaggerated drama at Harold's prize roses, as if 15 years of meticulous care had personally offended her aesthetic sensibilities. The trainer, clearly more familiar with protein powder than property law, took notes on an official-looking clipboard. I watched the footage that evening with mounting fury. These people were creating fraudulent documentation to support fraudulent fines. In my courtroom, we called that conspiracy to commit fraud. Then, Walt Henderson knocked on my door. The scent of pipe tobacco mixing with the cool evening air as he spoke in hushed, worried tones. "Judge, this woman has been systematically targeting people. Do you remember the Rodriguez family? She forced them to remove their Virgin of Guadalupe statue from their garden, calling it nonconforming religious imagery. She hit them with $800 in fines before they eventually had to sell and move away." My instincts as a judge kicked in. What else has she done? A single mother down the street got fined because her kids' chalk drawings were on their own driveway. They said it was defacing the common area aesthetics. We're talking about rainbows and hopscotch squares, Judge. It all clicked like evidence falling into place during closing arguments. Bryn wasn't just targeting me, she was waging a systematic harassment campaign against anyone who didn't fit her suburban ideal. Hispanic families, single mothers, elderly people on fixed incomes, and now a widowed judge who had previously ruled against her husband's contractor scams. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was discrimination disguised as HOA enforcement, supported by fraudulent documentation and illegal fines. I had unknowingly walked into the heart of a much larger criminal enterprise. This fence dispute now seemed like the least of it. The sound of my pen scratching as I documented these findings filled Harold's quiet office. He always said that good legal strategy was like surgery: precise, methodical, and devastatingly effective when done correctly. I was about to perform major surgery on Bryn Ashworth Sterling's little kingdom of petty tyranny. She had made the classic mistake of targeting someone who knew exactly how to dismantle her operation, piece by piece, using the very legal system she had been twisting for her own vendettas. Harold used to joke that judges were just referees with law degrees and permanent attitudes. Well, it was time to show this HOA Karen what happens when you pick a fight with someone who writes the rules of engagement for a living. Bryn's next move crossed the line from harassment to felony. It seemed that when manufactured violations weren't working, she thought actual breaking and entering might send a stronger message. She struck while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater to 18 months. My security cameras captured every criminal second of her so-called emergency property inspection, a legal authority that only existed in her delusional mind. There she was, strutting through my backyard like she owned the place, bold as brass in designer yoga pants. With a pink tape measure in hand, she photographed everything from angles that would make a paparazzi stalker blush. The audacity hit its peak when she pressed her face against my kitchen window, shading her eyes to peer inside at Harold's coffee mug, the one I couldn't bring myself to wash, still sitting on the counter. But Bryn's criminal stupidity didn't stop there. She deliberately left my back gate wide open, not by accident, on purpose. The security footage showed her yanking it open, checking to make sure the latch wouldn't catch, and then walking away with a satisfied smirk. When I got home that evening, exhausted from listening to domestic violence testimony, I found my sanctuary violated and my worst fear realized. Gavel was gone. This 14-year-old tabby wasn't just a pet. He was Harold's last gift to me. We had rescued him together from the courthouse parking lot during a thunderstorm 3 years ago. He'd sat on Harold's lap during chemo treatments, pouring comfort into his pain. He was the last living connection I had to 28 years of marriage. The panic hit me like a physical blow. I spent 3 days searching, my voice hoarse from calling his name through every alley and storm drain in the 6-block radius. Walt Henderson organized neighborhood search teams. Even the Rodriguez family, who had left due to Bryn's harassment, returned to help look. Then came the phone call that froze my blood. "Judge Blackwood, this is Dr. Martinez from Mountain View Animal Emergency. We have a cat that matches your description. He's in pretty bad shape." I found Gal barely conscious in an oxygen tent, his ribs broken, severely dehydrated, and traumatized beyond recognition. After $800 in emergency surgery, the vet gave me news that made my hands shake with fury. These injuries are consistent with being chased by machinery, possibly high-powered leaf blowers or lawn equipment. The stress alone nearly killed him. The security footage confirmed it. 1 hour after Bryn's illegal trespassing, her landscaping crew arrived with industrial leaf blowers, terrorizing my already traumatized cat through the open gate she had left. They chased him for 2 blocks before he collapsed into a storm drain, broken and near death. This was no longer just harassment. It was attempted murder. But here was Bryn's fatal mistake. She had just committed multiple felonies against a sitting judge who knew exactly how to use the legal system to destroy her. I changed every lock, posted no trespassing signs, and filed criminal charges for unlawful entry and animal cruelty. Then I called Sarah Morgan at Channel 7, a fearless journalist known for exposing suburban corruption. 3 nights later, Judge vs. HOA, when Watchdog's attack aired. Sarah's investigation uncovered Bryn's systematic targeting of minority and elderly residents, complete with security footage showing her illegal trespassing and the landscaping crew's attack on Gavel. The public's reaction was explosive. Donations poured in, not just for vet bills, but for legal fees to dismantle that psychotic HOA. 3 law firms offered pro bono services, and the Colorado Attorney General's office called to discuss civil rights violations. Most strikingly, 5 more families came forward with similar horror stories. Mrs. Morgan, an elderly woman, had been forced to remove her late husband's memorial garden. The Johnson family had been fined into bankruptcy over their disabled son's wheelchair ramp. It was a clear pattern of targeting anyone who didn't fit Bryn's vision of suburban perfection. The real game changer came when I dug into Colorado's property protection laws. Buried deep in the statutes, I found a golden legal weapon. Unlawful entry with intent to intimidate carried the same penalties as burglary. Plus, animal cruelty charges could be stacked with conspiracy if multiple people were involved. Bryn's landscaping crew hadn't just committed one crime, they had created a federal RICO predicate. That evening, Dale finally purred against my chest for the first time since the attack. The sound mixed with the hum of my new security system and the distant click of my keyboard as I drafted criminal complaints that would put an end to Bryn's reign of terror for good. Harold used to say that judges were just referees with permanent authority and long memories. It was time to show this suburban terrorist what happens when you attack a federal judge's family. She had escalated from civil violations to felony assault. My response would be biblical. Bryn's desperation reached a fever pitch when she realized that her criminal trespassing had backfired into federal charges. So, naturally, she decided to try to destroy my career before I could destroy hers. On Tuesday morning, a certified letter arrived on my desk from the Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission. The official letter had made my coffee taste like ash. Bryn's allegations were absurd. Judge Blackwood abuses her judicial authority to intimidate law-abiding homeowners, weaponizing the legal system for personal vendettas that threaten community safety. The evidence she provided was criminally creative. There were doctored photographs showing my memorial garden as some sort of eyesore, falsified witness statements from her designer and trainer claiming I had threatened them, and timestamps that would have made a CSI tech burst into laughter. But Bryn's nuclear move was leaking everything to political blogs that had opposed my previous environmental rulings. Within hours, I was trending as liberal judge terrorizes patriotic HOA. The comments sections erupted with keyboard warriors calling for my impeachment, disbarment, and offering creative ideas on what should happen to activist judges who supposedly hated America. For 72 hours, I watched 2 decades of my judicial service get torn apart by people who couldn't even spell jurisprudence but somehow understood constitutional law better than federal judges. Then, salvation arrived in the form of a silver-haired woman carrying homemade cookies. Patricia Pat Donnelly looked like the retired librarian everyone knows, sensible cardigan, orthopedic shoes, hands that trembled slightly with age, but she didn't look like a 25-year FBI veteran who specialized in financial crimes and had apparently been watching Bryn for weeks. "Judge, I think you should see this," she said, settling into Harold's chair with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. Pat spread photographs across my kitchen table like cards in a high-stakes game. Meet Bethany Sterling from Phoenix, Arizona. 3 insurance claims in 2 years, a mysterious flood, a convenient electrical fire, and miraculous vandalism. $400,000 in payouts vanished right before the grand jury convened. My judicial instincts kicked in, recognizing patterns like forensic evidence. She's done this before. Textbook operation. Target established neighborhoods, create conflicts to justify claims, disappear before investigations can catch up. Pat's FBI instincts were sharp as ever, even in retirement. But here was the kicker. She'd filed her current homeowner's application under a false identity. That was federal mail fraud. The documents Pat handed me made my prosecutor's heart sing. Bryn's current policy valued her $800,000 house at $2.8 million. Her application was full of lies about previous claims, identity changes, and financial history lies that would make federal prosecutors jump for joy. "She's not harassing you because of old grudges," Pat continued, arranging the evidence with professional precision. "You're the distraction. She's keeping everyone focused on HOA drama while embezzling association funds and setting up the next accidental fire. The revelation hit like a gavel to the skull. This wasn't personal vengeance. It was criminal misdirection. While I was busy battling fence violations, Bryn had been draining HOA emergency funds and preparing an insurance fraud scheme that would wreck the entire community. Pat handed me a manila folder so thick it could choke a defense attorney. Sterling Premium Builders had filed for bankruptcy last month. Colorado had suspended their license for tax evasion. The whole presidency wasn't about neighborhood control, it was about getting access to community funds for personal use. My harassment wasn't random, it was professional distraction. Keeping a federal judge tangled in petty disputes while she systematically robbed our community. Blind, but Pat's final revelation made my blood run cold. She's already filed preliminary insurance claims for developing structural issues and increasing neighborhood safety concerns. Your house isn't just a target, Judge. It's scheduled to be evidence in her next insurance scam. That evening, I sat surrounded by evidence that transformed my personal nightmare into a federal RICO case. Bank records showing $340,000 gone from HOA emergency funds, insurance applications full of enough lies to trigger perjury charges, and a clear pattern of targeting minorities and elderly residents' civil rights violations all around. Bryn hadn't chosen me because I'd ruled against her husband. She'd targeted me because terrorizing a federal judge made the perfect cover for systematically stealing and preparing for fraud, but in her criminal arrogance. She had made one fatal miscalculation. Instead of picking on defenseless elderly residents, she had chosen to go after someone who knew exactly how to dismantle criminal operations using every tool in the federal legal arsenal. The soft glow of my computer screen lit up Harold's office as I began drafting communications to federal prosecutors specializing in interstate fraud and civil rights violations. Harold always said that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon when wielded by someone who understood timing. Bryn Ashworth Sterling was about to learn that running insurance scams while terrorizing a federal judge wasn't just foolish, it was life sentence foolish. Pat slid a manila envelope across my kitchen table, its weight heavier than a death sentence. Inside were photographs that made my hands tremble and my prosecutor instincts scream in recognition. Judge, what I'm about to show you changes everything, Pat said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of hunting federal criminals. Bryn Ashworth Sterling doesn't exist. The first photo showed a 2018 California driver's license. It belonged to Rebecca Ashworth, but the face smiling back at me was Bryn's. The second was a record for Beth Sterling from Phoenix, same woman, different identity. The third made my coffee cup slip from my trembling fingers. It was Sandra McKenzie from Detroit, dated 2010, with a federal prisoner ID number stamped at the bottom. She's a professional community destroyer, Pat explained, organizing the evidence with meticulous precision. 4 states, 6 identities, systematic HOA infiltration, embezzlement, and insurance fraud. She's stolen over $4 million in the last decade. My judicial instincts kicked in. But the personal horror in her words made my voice crack. How many families has she destroyed? 15 confirmed, Pat replied. Always the same pattern: target established neighborhoods, create harassment campaigns against minorities and elderly residents, embezzle emergency funds, then torch high-value properties for insurance payouts. Pat's FBI instincts were razor-sharp. Even in retirement, in Sacramento, 3 Hispanic families were forced out before the community center mysteriously burned down. Phoenix lost 5 elderly residents to stress-related health issues under her reign of terror. The next document sent a chill through my veins. Architectural plans for my house, obtained through Sterling Premium Builders contractor database, were marked with detailed notes about electrical vulnerabilities, foundation access points, and optimal fire acceleration patterns. She's been planning to burn your house down since day one, Pat said softly. The harassment was just a distraction while she set up the perfect arson. Your property is valued at $180,000, but Harold's life insurance upgrades pushed the rebuild value to $320,000. She's planning to claim the fire spread to her property, triggering both policies for the maximum payout. My hands shook as I traced Harold's electrical upgrade notes in the margins, work we had done together during his final months, making improvements to our sanctuary. Bryn had turned our love into her criminal opportunity, but Pat's final revelation shattered every assumption I had made about this case. She's not just a criminal, Judge. She's a federal fugitive operating under stolen identities while technically still in witness protection. Bryn McKenzie testified against a Detroit fraud ring in 2012. She served 18 months federal time, then disappeared from the program in 2015. Pat continued. The implications hit me like a judicial gavel to the skull. This woman is running organized crime operations while under federal witness protection, using stolen identities to commit the exact crimes she had supposedly reformed from. The witness protection violation alone carries a 10-year federal minimum sentence, Pat added. Then add the multi-state fraud conspiracy, identity theft, and now attempted arson against a federal judge. She's looking at life without parole. I stared at the photographs of families she had destroyed, the communities she had devastated, and elderly residents who had died from stress-induced heart attacks during her harassment campaigns. My personal nightmare was just the latest chapter in a decade-long federal crime spree. The musty smell of old case files mingled with the bitter taste of betrayal as I realized the full scale of Bryn's criminal empire. She hadn't targeted me because of old grudges. She had researched my husband's death, my financial vulnerability, my judicial schedule, and my emotional attachments to craft the perfect victim profile. But in her criminal arrogance, she had made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd chosen to commit federal crimes against someone who understood exactly how to coordinate multi-jurisdictional prosecutions with every federal agency. From the FBI to the Treasury, it was time to show this professional predator what federal justice looked like when it was personal, permanent, and merciless. My kitchen quickly transformed into a federal war room. By Thursday evening, Pat, Walt, and attorney Rebecca Morgan sat around Harold's table like avenging angels, surrounded by evidence boxes that could bury Bryn's criminal empire 6 feet underground. Rebecca Morgan, a former federal prosecutor turned white-collar defense attorney, had never lost a RICO case. She'd apparently been waiting her entire career for a villain this perfectly prosecutable. She had driven down from Denver with 3 paralegals and enough legal firepower to flatten a small dictatorship. Judge, we're not just prosecuting neighborhood harassment, Rebecca announced, spreading color-coded flowcharts across the table like battle plans for World War II. We're dismantling a decade-long federal crime spree that's destroyed 15 communities and stolen over $4 million. The smell of fresh legal documents mixed with Walt's pipe tobacco as we laid out our 3-pronged assault: federal annihilation, state prosecution, and civil rights demolition. Rebecca's strategy was precise and surgical, yet biblical in scope. Federal charges first, she explained. Mail fraud across state lines carries a 20-year minimum. Wire fraud for electronic HOA theft adds another 20. Identity theft using witness protection programs, 10 years mandatory. RICO conspiracy for systematic community destruction, life without parole. She smiled like a shark about to feed. We're talking about federal sentences that will keep her locked up until climate change rounds the prison. Pat coordinated federal agency involvement with retired FBI efficiency, making current agents look like mall security, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Treasury financial crimes, FBI Interstate Fraud Task Force. They're all drooling over this case, Pat said. By tomorrow morning, Bryn will have more federal surveillance than a terrorist cell. My role was evidence preservation and victim coordination, skills I'd honed during 20 years of complex criminal cases. I'd memorized every provision of Colorado's Open Records Act during law school after a slumlord tried hiding financial records. HOA finances were completely transparent to community members who knew how to request them. We were about to demand 5 years of detailed accounting and watch Bryn's embezzlement empire crumble under public scrutiny. Walt's community intelligence network was our secret weapon. Every family Bryn terrorized is documenting everything, he reported, organizing victim statements with military precision. Mrs. Rodriguez is driving back from Phoenix with 17 witnesses. The Johnson family is keeping disability discrimination records that will make federal prosecutors weep with joy. But our most satisfying preparation came from the technical surveillance upgrade. Pat had transformed my modest security system into a federal evidence collection machine capable of recording crimes in courtroom quality detail. Every camera angle was calibrated for maximum prosecutorial impact. Here's the brilliant part, Pat explained as she tested the audio equipment capable of capturing conversations from 3 houses away. Bryn is actively committing new crimes while we're building the case. Every fraudulent fine, every harassment letter, and every HOA fund transfer is creating real-time evidence for federal prosecutors. Rebecca took charge of immediate legal protection, executing it with the precision and ruthlessness of someone skilled in dismantling white-collar criminals. Emergency injunctions would freeze the HOA accounts by tomorrow morning. Criminal complaints would be filed in 3 different jurisdictions at once. Civil rights violations would be brought before the Colorado Attorney General for systematic targeting based on ethnicity and age. The financial consequences for Bryn's operation were just as devastating. From my time as a judge, I knew that the Homeowners Protection Act required insurance companies to inform mortgage holders when fraud investigations were underway. Bryn's insurance schemes would trigger audits for every Pinewood policy, potentially saving neighbors hundreds of thousands of dollars in premium hikes while completely destroying her credibility with every insurance company in the country. Our emergency protocols acknowledged that cornered criminals often became more dangerous. To counter this, Rebecca had arranged for protective surveillance for vulnerable residents, including the elderly and families with small children. From our research into federal cases, we knew that fraudsters involved in systematic crimes often escalated to violence when facing life sentences. By midnight, we had crafted a legal strategy designed for the complete annihilation of Bryn's criminal empire, while ensuring maximum protection for every victim she had terrorized. The precision of our approach was flawless, the scope was vast, and the outcome was inevitable. When this is over, Rebecca summed up with prosecutorial satisfaction, Bryn Mackenzie will spend her remaining years in federal maximum security. Sterling premium builders will be liquidated to provide restitution for the victims. Every resident who was harassed will receive compensation, along with punitive damages, and we will set legal precedents to protect communities across the country from predators like her. The soft hum of my newly upgraded security system mixed with the click of my keyboard as I drafted victim impact statements designed to ensure that federal judges would demand the harshest possible sentences. Harold always said that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon when combined with overwhelming legal force applied at the right psychological moment. Tomorrow, Bryn Ashworth Sterling would discover that terrorizing a federal judge's community wasn't just catastrophically foolish, it was a life sentence guaranteeing, legacy-destroying, federal prison-bound mistake. It was time to execute justice with extreme legal prejudice. Bryn's response to our legal offensive proved that she had graduated from petty harassment to full-blown domestic terrorism. Her desperation was about to turn my neighborhood into a crime scene that would have federal prosecutors salivating. The attack came Tuesday afternoon while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater. Perfect timing. That Bryn had clearly researched through my public court schedule. My military-grade security system captured every felonious second in high-definition evidence quality. At 2:47 p.m., and marked trucks arrived, with a crew moving with the kind of professional efficiency only seen in serious criminal enterprises. These weren't landscapers. They were arson specialists, dressed in coveralls and carrying equipment with one purpose: to turn my house into an insurance fire that would spread to Bryn's property, ensuring the maximum payout. The cameras recorded them creating accelerant pathways around my foundation, installing and marked propane connections near electrical panels, and positioning dry vegetation in patterns that would guarantee the fire spread toward Bryn's million-dollar target. The precision was chilling, the criminal intent undeniable, and the quality of the federal evidence was absolutely devastating. But Bryn's nuclear-level stupidity reached its peak when she arrived with Channel 7's news crew, claiming she had received anonymous tips about dangerous fire hazards at the judge's residence. "Community safety is my only concern," she told Sarah Morgan while standing directly over the planted evidence of her own arson conspiracy. "When public officials ignore fire prevention, innocent neighbors could die." The sheer audacity was staggering. The federal charges were going to be monumental. My phone exploded with calls from Pat's surveillance network. Walt had photographed the entire crew from various angles. Mrs. Rodriguez had recorded license plates, making police lineups unnecessary. Even our postal worker had documented suspicious activity while delivering what would become the last mail my house might ever receive. Then, Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived for Bryn's requested safety inspection. Morrison, a veteran of 30 years in arson investigations, had a trained eye that spotted planted evidence faster than a federal prosecutor could recognize a plea bargain. "Judge," he said quietly, kneeling beside the obviously artificial accelerant patterns. "Someone's setting up your house to burn. This isn't a code violation. This is premeditated murder." SOA analysis later confirmed the presence of professionally applied fire accelerants. Gas connections violated 16 safety codes and bore fingerprints matching sterling premiums. Contractor database. The placement patterns indicated expert knowledge of fire behavior, insurance investigation procedures, and how to create accidental blazes that would trigger maximum payouts. "Whoever planned this knows how to kill people and make it look like an electrical malfunction," Morrison continued, his disgust palpable. "These aren't random safety issues. This is systematic preparation for insurance fraud through homicide." But Bryn's desperation reached its peak when Morrison refused to condemn my property based on the planted evidence. Her response was captured on his body camera as she attempted to bribe him, turning misdemeanor harassment into federal corruption charges that could carry decades-long prison sentences. "Inspector, surely we can handle this situation efficiently," Bryn said, sliding a thick envelope across his clipboard with practiced corruption. "Community safety requires proper documentation, and I'm sure you understand the importance of cooperation." Morrison's body camera recorded every incriminating word, every illegal gesture, and Bryn's stunned expression when he informed her that bribing public officials was a federal felony punishable by at least 10 years in minimum security. The community's response was swift and overwhelming. Pat's intelligence network uncovered similar arson setups at 3 other targeted properties, all owned by elderly residents or minority families. Federal agents descended on Pinewood like antibodies attacking an infection, documenting systematic terrorism that made Bryn's operation appear like organized crime. Rebecca Morgan's legal counterattack was fast and unforgiving. Federal warrants were issued for Bryn, her husband, and their entire criminal crew within hours. Bank accounts were frozen pending a RICO investigation. Sterling Premium was placed under federal asset forfeiture, set to liquidate everything they'd stolen. But the most delicious irony: Bryn's planted evidence became forensic proof of premeditated arson conspiracy. Her bribery attempt created federal corruption charges that would stack with her existing crimes, like legal dominoes falling toward life sentences. That evening, I sat surrounded by the evidence that would ensure federal prison for everyone involved in Bryn's criminal enterprise. The acrid smell of planted accelerants still hung in the air, but now, it no longer signified destruction. It represented justice being prepared with federal precision. My hands shook as I realized how close I had come to dying in Harold's house, surrounded by memories of our life together, while Bryn collected insurance money off my corpse. The woman hadn't just planned theft, she had planned murder disguised as an accident, but her criminal overconfidence had unraveled her entire operation. Every planted accelerant became federal evidence. Every bribery attempt added more felony charges. Every witness she tried to silence was now cooperating with federal prosecutors specializing in securing maximum sentences. The soft hum of federal surveillance equipment mixed with the sounds of law enforcement agencies coordinating dawn raids that would permanently end Bryn's reign of terror. Harold always said that justice delayed wasn't justice denied, it was justice being sharpened to lethal precision. Tomorrow morning, domestic terrorist Bryn Ashworth Sterling would discover that attempting to murder a federal judge carried consequences beyond her wildest imagination. The explosion at 3:17 a.m. yanked me from dreams of Harold into a nightmare that would haunt Bryn Ashworth Sterling for the rest of her federal prison sentence. I had been sleeping in Walt's guest room, unable to stay in my house after the arson preparation from the day before, when the blast shook windows 3 blocks away. From Walt's bedroom window, I saw 28 years of memories go up in flames, turning the night into a hellish orange daylight. Harold's house, our sanctuary, the kitchen where we had planned our retirement, the bedroom where I had held him during his final nights, the memorial garden, where his ashes had been scattered among roses he tended for 15 years gone, consumed by fire and now federal evidence. The fire was so intense that Denver Fire had to establish a 3-block perimeter. Professional arsonists had turned my home into a controlled demolition, disguised as an electrical malfunction. Using techniques designed for maximum destruction and optimal insurance timing. But Bryn's criminal overconfidence had just set the most perfect trap in federal prosecution history. I stood on Walt's porch in Harold's old bathrobe, watching our life burn while federal arson investigator Marcus Webb coordinated the crime scene that looked like domestic terrorism. "Judge, this wasn't random," he said grimly. "Thermal imaging reveals accelerant patterns forming perfect fire highways. Someone wanted you dead and wanted it to look accidental. The evidence was overwhelming and perfectly preserved. My security system had survived inside fireproof housing, capturing every criminal second. Sterling Premium's crew entering at 2:45 a.m. Followed by Bryn's husband carrying professional fire acceleration equipment at 3:10 a.m. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Insurance investigator Jennifer Park uncovered that Bryn had filed preliminary damage claims for fire spreading from a neighboring property at 2:30 a.m. minus 47 minutes before my house was actually set alight. She had submitted documents claiming her house would suffer fire damage before my house was even burning. "That's not a prediction," Park explained with prosecutorial satisfaction. "That's documentary proof of premeditated murder." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors showed up with coffee, blankets, and righteous anger, which made federal agents take careful notes. Mrs. Rodriguez took my hands, tears streaming down her face. "Maya, she tried to kill you. We all saw her planning this murder." Then came the moment that would forever live in federal prosecution lore. Bryn actually showed up at the fire scene. The woman appeared in designer athleisure and full makeup at 4:30 a.m., acting concerned for the community while standing just 50 feet from the house she had just set on fire. Her performance was so convincing, it was almost award-worthy, displaying a complete sociopathic detachment from reality. "This tragic accident reinforces why our home must maintain strict safety standards," she told Channel 7 with dramatic grief. Judge Blackwood's resistance to proper inspections may have contributed to this devastating loss of life. What she didn't realize was that FBI agents were recording every word for her eventual murder trial, while federal marshals were already preparing Dawn arrest warrants based on evidence so overwhelming. That plea bargains were utterly impossible. The financial investigation revealed a criminal mastermind wrapped in sheer stupidity. Bryn had embezzled $340,000 from HOA funds to finance the professional arson. Her insurance policy valued her home at $2.8 million, despite purchasing it for just $800,000. The fire damage she had pre-filed would trigger payouts that could exceed the budgets of entire countries. But federal agents had been monitoring every transaction since Pat's investigation began. Bank records showed payments to known arsonists, and cell phone data placed the criminals at the scene during the ignition. The insurance applications were full of lies that would ensure perjury convictions in all 50 states. Rebecca Morgan's response was swift and brutal. Federal marshals arrested both Bryn and her husband during dawn raids that were broadcast live on national television. Their assets were seized under RICO forfeiture and would be used to compensate victims from 4 states. Sterling Premium was liquidated faster than evidence through a shredder. The charges were a masterpiece of legal destruction: attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, insurance fraud across multiple states, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and RICO violations that would keep them locked up until archaeologists uncovered their skeletons. That evening, I sat in Walt's kitchen, surrounded by federal agents from multiple states, coordinating the largest HOA fraud prosecution in U.S. history. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to my clothes, but it no longer smelled like destruction. It now smelled like justice being prepared with federal precision. My house was gone, but Harold's memory lived on in the community that had protected me when his sanctuary couldn't. Bryn had tried to murder me in my sleep and ended up creating federal evidence that would keep her locked away until the sun burned out. The soft click of handcuffs on news footage felt like Harold whispering his approval from whatever legal afterlife judges inhabit. Some battles, as he used to say, were worth losing everything to win permanently. Tomorrow, Bryn Ashworth Sterling, a domestic terrorist, would discover that attempting to murder a federal judge came with consequences far beyond what she ever imagined. 7 days after my house became a crime scene, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom in federal custody, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer athleisure, facing charges that would keep her locked away until archaeologists discovered her remains. The irony was so perfect it felt as though Harold had orchestrated it from the afterlife. My courtroom was packed to capacity, with people standing in every available space, and overflow crowds watching live streams outside. Federal marshals, FBI agents, insurance investigators, and prosecutors from 4 states filled the gallery like an army preparing for battle. Channel 7 had cameras strategically positioned for maximum dramatic impact. The Colorado Attorney General sat in the front row, taking notes for future civil rights legislation. Most strikingly, 17 families Bryn had terrorized were present as witnesses, including Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnson family with their disabled son, and elderly residents who had been driven from their homes by her systematic harassment campaigns. Judge Patricia Morrison, my colleague who had agreed to handle the arraignment after my recusal, called the court to order with the gravity fitting for a case involving domestic terrorism. The people of Colorado versus Bryn McKenzie, also known as Bethany Sterling, also known as Rebecca Ashworth, also known as Sandra Mitchell. It took 30 seconds to read the list of false identities. The criminal charges took 4 minutes: attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, insurance fraud across multiple states, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, RICO violations, identity theft, witness protection fraud, and systematic civil rights violations. Bryn's attorney, a public defender who had clearly drawn the short straw in legal history, requested reasonable bond, citing her community and lack of flight risk. Federal prosecutor Amanda Stevens stood with the satisfaction of someone holding a royal flush in a poker game. Your Honor, the defendant has operated under 6 false identities across 4 states while stealing over $4 million and destroying 15 communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her house. Then, Bryn appeared on television, claiming that the victim had caused her own near-death experience. The gallery murmured with righteous anger, making federal marshals shift uncomfortably. But the moment that would be replayed in legal documentaries for years to come occurred when Bryn made the catastrophic decision to address the court directly. Your Honor, she said, turning toward me with the unflinching arrogance of a sociopath who still didn't comprehend the extent of her destruction. Judge Blackwood has used her position to orchestrate a vendetta against law-abiding homeowners. She's weaponized the federal government against citizens exercising legitimate HOA authority. This entire prosecution is judicial abuse disguised as justice. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Federal agents exchanged looks that signaled additional charges. Prosecutors furiously scribbled notes. The gallery held its collective breath, waiting the judicial response. Judge Morrison's voice carried the weight of 2 decades of federal bench authority when she spoke. Miss McKenzie, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge by setting fire to her house while she slept. You embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from community emergency funds. You operated under false identities while terrorizing elderly and minority residents. You filed fraudulent insurance claims totaling millions of dollars across multiple states. She paused, allowing the gravity of federal justice to settle in the courtroom like a shroud. The evidence against you includes security footage of the arson, recorded bribery attempts, documented harassment campaigns, financial records of systematic theft, and insurance applications containing lies that amount to federal perjury. You are not a victim of judicial vendetta. You are a domestic terrorist who targeted a federal judge's community for systematic destruction. The mic drop moment came when Morrison continued, "Furthermore, this court has reviewed evidence that you've destroyed 15 communities and displaced over 200 families through identical fraud schemes. Your targeting of elderly and minority residents constitutes systematic civil rights violations that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." Bryn's face crumpled as the reality of life sentences crashed through her sociopathic delusions. Her attorney whispered urgently about plea bargains, but everyone knew they were mathematically impossible, given the overwhelming evidence. "Bond is denied," Judge Morrison declared, her voice final and unwavering, echoing through the packed gallery. "The defendant poses an extreme flight risk and a danger to community safety. Remand to federal custody pending trial." The gallery erupted in applause, and the federal marshals didn't even attempt to suppress it. Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed with relief. Walt pumped his fist as though his team had won the World Series. 17 families who had been terrorized by Bryn's criminal empire finally saw justice being served at its fullest. As federal marshals led Bryn away in chains, she turned toward me one last time, her eyes burning with hatred that could have powered an entire city. "This isn't over, Judge. You'll never prove I specifically targeted you for murder." The courtroom fell silent as I stood, my black robes carrying the authority of 2 decades on the federal bench, and delivered the words that would close this chapter of domestic terrorism forever. "Mrs. Mackenzie, the court finds your confession that this was indeed targeted harassment duly noted for sentencing purposes. Federal prosecutors now have a documented admission of premeditated intent. Thank you for eliminating any remaining reasonable doubt." The sound of justice being served echoed in my courtroom, like Harold's final approval. 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen, watching cardinals feast at Harold's memorial feeder while Bryn Mackenzie was served her daily dose of justice in federal maximum security. Life without parole, and a concrete box, where domestic terrorists would have to face their life choices for eternity. The taste of my morning coffee mixed with the sweet satisfaction of watching evil get what it deserved. The criminal trials were prosecutors' dreams and defense attorneys' nightmares. Federal juries took just 3 hours and 47 minutes to convict both Ashworth Sterlings on all charges, apparently needing a break for lunch. Bryn received life without parole for attempted murder of a federal judge, plus consecutive sentences for arson, fraud, and civil rights violations that would keep her behind bars until climate change turned Colorado into beachfront property. Her husband received 25 years for conspiracy, ensuring Sterling Premium's criminal enterprise would never rise again. The $3.2 million in seized assets was distributed to victims across 4 states, creating the largest HOA fraud restitution in American legal history. Every family targeted by Bryn received compensation, plus punitive damages that set legal precedents to protect communities from future predators. The real victory, though, was Pinewood's transformation from a terrorized community to a model of transparency that law schools began to study. Walt Henderson was unanimously elected HOA president, instituting measures that made embezzlement impossible, while resident protections guaranteed due process for any future disputes. Our new bylaws required community approval for fines over $50, monthly financial reports posted online, and mandatory mediation before legal action could be pursued. Most importantly, targeting based on ethnicity, age, or economic status was explicitly prohibited, with automatic removal for any board members who violated this rule. The ripple effects spread like wildfire through American suburbs. Colorado's Pinewood Protection Act mandated HOA financial transparency, limited fine authority, and set up state oversight for communities with recurring complaint patterns. 15 other states adopted similar legislation, safeguarding millions from future Bryn Mackenzies. While their inspiration rotted in federal prison, the Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship grew beyond our wildest dreams. Documentary rights, book sales, And donations from grateful communities raised $750,000 to support first-generation college students pursuing community law and civil rights. This year's star recipient was Maria Rodriguez, the daughter of a family Brin had terrorized, who was now heading to Harvard Law to protect vulnerable communities nationwide. Our annual Pinewood Justice Festival attracted thousands. Celebrating our community's triumph over individual evil, local vendors donated proceeds to legal defense funds, helping other neighborhoods fight corruption. Walt's Bluegrass Band headlined, while Pat Donnelly ran packed workshops on financial crime investigation, helping residents in 47 states identify and prosecute HOA fraud. The festival blended celebration and education through our Community Resource Center, helping neighborhoods recognize harassment patterns, document financial crimes, and coordinate federal investigations. 41 copycat criminals had been arrested using our model, saving thousands of families from Brin's fate. My judicial career earned national recognition for maintaining ethics under extreme pressure, leading to speaking engagements at law schools about protecting community rights while preserving judicial integrity. The American Bar Association created the Blackwood Award to honor judges who demonstrated courage defending civil rights against systemic oppression. But personal victory meant more than professional accolades. Gavel had fully recovered and now ruled our rebuilt sanctuary with a feline authority that would intimidate federal marshals. The memorial garden bloomed more magnificently than ever. Harold's roses thriving in soil enriched by community love and protected by security, ensuring no future terrorism could threaten it. This evening, the golden sunset streamed through new windows as I reviewed scholarship applications, with Gav supervising from his throne. Outside, Pat tended her victory garden. Walt taught neighborhood children the harmonica. Families gathered for conversations that Brin's reign of terror had once made impossible. The sound of children's laughter replaced the sirens and confrontations, proving that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about protection, healing, and hope for futures free from suburban predators. Here's my message for anyone facing whole nightmares or dealing with petty tyrants with measuring tapes: document everything. Organize your neighbors. And remember, bullies only win when good people stay silent. Your horror story could become someone else's salvation. Drop a comment sharing your own whole nightmare. You're not alone in fighting these suburban dictators. And hit that subscribe button for more whole stories, because next week, we'll be going after the tax assessor who tried to steal an entire neighborhood for personal profit. That revenge was equally biblical, and the federal charges were absolutely beautiful. Together, we're building communities where justice prevails and criminals lose permanently. That's a wrap for today's whole episode. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, hit that like button. Leave your thoughts, and let us know if you've faced whole madness, too. Subscribe so you don't miss the next whole meltdown we post.